Good morning. How are you, class? Welcome to week 5. Great job on your Discovering Talent presentations. I appreciate that you gave background as to how your talent was nurtured, as well as you provided examples of your talent. Thank you. I have already viewed them and I've graded them, and I will be entering grades for those shortly. Also, nice work on your process and product sketchbook assignments. Now, as we move on to our content connection and process product activity assignment for this week, it is important that we apply our experiences from last week's sketchbook assignments. And I hope that while you were doing them, you allowed yourself an opportunity for reflection, as we discussed last week. Again, I was hoping that you approach the two activities paying very close attention to how your senses were both involved and influenced. And of course, putting yourself in your student's shoes. Now, if you still feel a little confused about process and product right now and how it ties into teaching, please allow it some time. I can relate with you. It would be of great benefit to rewatch Dr. Slade's video on Blackboard as she explains the differences between process and product art in schools. Now, on my last announcement, I promised that I would share a personal teaching experience in hopes that it inspires you to think more critically about the learning environments that we create for process and product experiences to happen. Now, although this experience has to do with teaching art in high school, it is still very relatable to what we are discussing here for early childhood. So here it goes. It was not until teaching a few years that I began to deeply reflect on my approach to teaching art and how it affected my students' learning and engagement. It was only then that I began to understand the emphasis that I put on product and how little on students' creative processes. I got really good at getting students excited and engaged about cool looking art products and the techniques to achieve those looks. My students started to believe in their abilities when they saw that they could simulate my examples. Our art shows were amazing. We won awards, competitions, and some students were even awarded art scholarships as they moved on to more advanced levels of art. Yet, I began to realize that as beautiful as the artwork was, as much as it displayed a mastery of technique, and no matter how satisfied students, parents, their peers, and administration were, something, for me, I was noticing was still missing. I'm going to share an example with you of what I'm talking about. Here we have what I feel is technically strong, but still lacking. I would consider these examples, as beautiful as they are, as product-based art. And the reason why is because although it displays its beautiful examples of art elements and principles, we have analogous colors, we have backgrounds, we have great examples of excellent compositions, great use of shading, values, two-point perspective, just some really beautiful artworks here. But I feel like, do they really tell us about these students other than the technical abilities? Do we know anything more about these students, their backgrounds, their interests, their culture, who they are, what their goals are, what they're fighting for, what their story is? I get what I'm saying? Okay. So I noticed that many art students who were considered the best artists of the school and were well on their way to receiving scholarships, they would struggle in articulating the connections to their artwork. They no doubt proved to be good duplicators, but most had a very challenging time explaining the reasons for their creative decisions and connecting their art to their feelings, their emotions, identity, background, stories, and culture. In addition, their dialogue about their artwork also lacked comprehension of their creative processes. So for example, admittance of false starts, mistakes, failures, restarts, pauses, successes, reasons for inspiration. Where would their ideas come from? Their process of research, their goals for growth, and a curiosity in experiencing various levels of the aesthetic. All of those were completely non-existent. So in other words, my students were creating visually appealing artwork with almost no regard to their approach and process in creating that artwork. For me, it was simple. I was approaching their work for them. I taught them art elements and principles of design. With a lot of practice, they mastered them. And then they would usually select popular characters, styles to include in their artwork, or sometimes they would copy what was already done or what had already been done. And I facilitated this process. The point is, their artwork, other than the fact that they chose the ideas or images that were of interest to them, they had little to do about them and their process. And I was not engaging them to explore those processes. Their experiences were shallow and were mostly about following instructions, mastering technique, and pleasing the teacher and their peers. They were not approaching their art making in the same way that an artist does, that an artist gets inspired, that the way that an artist does research and has aesthetic experiences. Let me provide an example. Okay, so these are the artworks that started to develop as I started to change my approach to the way that I taught art with my high school students. And you can quickly see that they might not be so clean and crisp and defined, but they're starting to take on this new dynamic. And maybe that's a key word here, is that, I mean, they're evolving. The artworks are changing, and we have a variety of different ideas, concepts, and stories that are being told here. I feel like this is really beautiful what we were achieving together. I would consider these works, because of my approach in teaching the students and our collaboration together in creating these works, I would say that these are more a process-based artworks. And I'll explain a little bit more why I feel that way. Here's another example. Now, when you look at these, you're probably thinking, okay, hold on. How can you possibly justify these artworks that you see here and say, you know what, let's go back to these. Obviously, these took a great amount of time. You know, that those assignments might have taken a week, maybe even 2 weeks of work, and you could see a lot of technical skills going on. How can you compare that to this? And, you know, I mean, a student could have done that in an hour. They could have done it in one class period or a couple of days. Even the abstract painting, you might say, what artistic ability did that take to just, splash around paint on the paper? And I get what you're saying, but you got to hear the process behind this. Now, remember, I'm saying that this is process-based artwork, okay? So the focus is not on the end result. The focus is not on how this comes out. I'm focusing on how the students approach this artwork, their history behind creating this. So let me get more into that. So I'm not saying that I was in the wrong and now I'm in the right. I am still on a journey to find the best way to serve my students so that they are empowered, right? What I can tell you is this, that when I finally admitted that my approach to teaching art contributed to the shallow experiences, I became determined to explore alternative approaches that would empower my art students in understanding their journey and their art experiences. And our focus would be on that, not on creating award-winning artwork. Artwork displayed in my class afterward was not as refined as it used to be, as you saw on the examples. But that was okay. The work was way more meaningful to students. And I was confident that it was uniquely theirs and that they could tell me everything about their journey in creating it. You can imagine how confused and distraught a school community would be with an art teacher changing tactics to an already well-oiled art program. Well, that is not exactly what happened. I was still on a mission to win competitions and scholarships, but my priority would be about engaging my students in rich experiences of self-reflection. Their artwork would not only have to tell a story of who they were and who they were becoming, but they had to be able to articulate those concepts using their actual voice as well. In other words, they could no longer hide behind the saying, let the artwork speak for itself. All of this took precedence before we would concern ourselves with how beautiful the artwork was. From that point onward, the latter would always take second place in my classroom. This experience changed everything about my approach to teaching art, as well as how I felt about the goal or goals of art in schools. Now, let me show you an example of a little bit of the process that I would do with my high school students. Because remember, we're looking at these and you're like, well, how'd you validate that? Like, how was it fair that students would take more time, in their artwork, maybe, looking at this one with the clock in the hands, there's a little bit more technical ability going on with the shading and, a little bit more kind of thought into, the concept, or maybe even looking at these where, the product was the focus. And then it's like, how in the world, you have someone splashing paint and it takes them maybe an hour or two to create that. How do you say that that's okay? Well, let me tell you a little of the process. And listen to this. I'm in no way saying, do this for your assignments this week, okay? I'm just showing you how involved I got with my students in helping them understand their process in creating art. So I created these two papers, okay? These two ideas. I created one which was called a validation paper. So they had to validate to me what their process was going to be. So they had to tell me, how they were going to get inspired, what resources they were going to be looking at. Did they already have a concept or idea in mind? What images, what did they want to symbolize to tell their story? What story did they want to tell? Where were they going with this artwork? Then they had to tell me how they were going to approach their research. Where were they going to look to find answers into how they were going to take that idea or that concept, and how were they going to make a visual representation of that? You got a blank paper or blank canvas. How are you going to take the idea in your mind and translate that into a visual form for everyone to understand your story? There has to be a process in that. And I wanted to know what that was. I wanted to know where they were going to get their ideas from, and how they were going to research that idea to come up with those visual representations to tell their story to the viewer. And then I wanted to know how they were going to, what technical goals they wanted to work on. Were they going to concentrate on their shading? Had they never done paint before? Were they going to focus on that? Were they going to try scratchboard? Maybe there was a certain technique that they maybe have tried before and they wanted practice on, or maybe they had never tried it and they wanted to experiment with. So I made them fill out this paper prior to doing any work. And this was a way for us to create that dialogue between teacher and student, and to get them starting to think and get inspired for how they were going to approach their artwork. And the reason why I call it a validation paper is this validated their process. They were informing me, and they were letting me know that they had begun the process of thinking about their creative process, okay? And then I created this. It's called the 5 Stages of Aesthetic Experience. And it's basically kind of follows the same validation paper format. They needed to express, this would be done afterward, okay? So they would be keeping this in mind while they're working on their work or their artwork. But then this is where I would want them at the end of their artwork. Let's talk about this. You tell me what your idea was, the way that you researched, the way that you worked, how this experience changed your life. Was it worth it? Why wasn't it worth it? What was a success? What was a failure? And then the last thing, sharing with others, was very, very important, because I had a lot of students who created such awesome artwork, but then they wanted to hide it. They wanted to put it in the closet or hide it from everybody because they were either embarrassed or they just had this belief that they didn't want to share it with everyone. And I said, you know what? You can't complete the process. You can't complete the cycle of an aesthetic experience unless you share it with others. It's like, it's not right that the artwork does this for you, this self-gratification, this fulfillment of you understand your role and your place and your relationship to the world and your peers, and you have this great moment of appreciation, between you and your artwork and your place in this world. And then you don't share that. You have to share it with others and share your experience and your story with others, so others can relate with you, and you can learn from others, and others can learn from you, right? So I just wanted to share that with you. I'm not saying to do this. I'm just saying when it comes to process-based approach, this is where our mindset is. We want students to explore their creative process, right? And that the emphasis is not on the final result, and we're not, necessarily expecting ugly work, or we don't want ugly work, but we're not even thinking about that. we're thinking about this. We're thinking about what the student's process was in creating their artwork, and for them to understand that. That's what's valuable. That's what's important. Okay? So let me stop sharing. All right. So just please keep in mind that as we approach our content connections assignment, as well as our activity, where we do our 2 art activities that are different, the process and the product, I want you to just consider these questions. So I'm just gonna say these questions and I want you to just reflect on them, okay? What is the point in hanging up our students' artwork if there are 20 or 30 pieces that look exactly the same? Here's an example. What is the point? What are we celebrating? I'm not saying that there's nothing to celebrate. I'm just saying, what are we celebrating? Are we celebrating creativity when they all look the same? I'm not going to answer that. I'm going to let you answer that on your own. Just something to think about. Very powerful, right? Does our students' work reflect their creative processes, or does it reflect ours? Do we tell them to fix mistakes? Did we fix things in their artwork for them? What did the environment look like as our students worked on their artwork? Because it makes a difference, right? Was it mostly us guiding and doing the thinking? What if students were asked why they created what they did? Would they say, oh, you know, my teacher told me to do this in this way, you know, or, you know, it was a requirement of the class? Was their artwork their vision, or was it ours? Now, please don't get me wrong. There is definitely great value in students learning to follow directions or to be guided by us through their process. But on the other hand, I am not convinced that having our students create the same exact product, or to be putting so much emphasis on the final result, is really helping to develop or nurture their creativity. I have a few more questions to consider. How would we approach our learning environment to allow for a process-based experience? What materials and tools would we have available for that independence? How might we arrange seating or scheduling to accommodate creativity for every child? What steps would we encourage children to take to reflect on their creative processes? And how would we assess their products when everyone is creating something different? Would we grade their products, you know, as a product, as the final product, or would we be grading on their process, or both? And if we're focusing on the process, how would we do that? Please take some time to reflect on this as we continue exploring process and product this week. I'm sure that after examining your textbook reading, Dr. Slade's videos on Blackboard, and, you know, of course, reflecting on these scenarios that I've been bringing up, I'm sure that you're quite ready to tackle the assignments for week 5 with success. Now, on your process and product activity assignment, please approach it with great care and consideration. What we don't want to see is 2 activities that mirror each other. They should be completely opposite. For example, if you used a ditto, a handout, or worksheet, teacher examples with a lot of heavy guidance from the teacher for that one activity, then the other activity should be completely opposite of that. If both activities are very similar, then I'm afraid we are not going, or that we're not quite grasping the difference between process and product. So in that case, please email me so that I can help you, and together we can answer any questions that you might have, okay? So your emails are always welcome. Please email me. I hope that you have an awesome week 5. And for now, until next time, I'm gonna say goodbye and we'll see you.